Okay, Psalm 90 and starting at verse 1. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world. Even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn man to destruction and say, return, O children of men. For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, and like a watch in the night. You carry them away like a flood. They are like asleep. In the morning they are like grass which grows up. In the morning it flourishes and grows up. In the evening it is cut down and withers. For we have been consumed by your anger, and by your wrath we are terrified. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your countenance. For all your days have passed away in your wrath. We finish our years like a sigh. The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength, they are 80 years. Yet their boast is only labour and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. Who knows the power of your anger? For as the fear of you, so is your wrath. So teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Return, O Lord, how long? And have compassion on your servants. O satisfy us early with your mercy, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad according to the days which you have afflicted us, the years in which we have seen evil. Let your work appear to your servants, and your glory to their children. And let the beauty of the Lord, our God, be upon us, and establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Amen.
I'd like us to turn to the reading that was read earlier in the service from Psalm 90. And I was first drawn to this psalm some while ago by a phrase towards the end of the psalm, which God willing we look at tonight. Let the beauty, or may the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us. And that just caught my mind going, and that's what really drew me to this psalm. But then as I read more of the psalm, those words stood out. O Lord, teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom, that we might use them wisely. Teach us to number our days. So that's what we're really going to be looking at this morning. It's a Psalm 90, Psalm by Moses. We read it's Moses, the man of God, one of the oldest psalms in the book of Psalms. And Moses was a man of God. We know from the very beginning, as a baby, he was kept by God, wonderfully preserved. God so arranged in his providence, he'd be raised in Pharaoh's household. And we see God at work in Moses' life from the very beginning. And then how he'd be called apart, and he'd be commissioned to bring God's people out of Egypt. And then of all the intimate dealings that Moses had with God. How that the law written by God's own hand was given to Moses, and many other touching incidents in and through his life. And whatever place you land on in the life of Moses, we see him as a man of God. He's a man taken up with God. You could not really make any sense of his life apart from God. And now that being said, Moses here is reflecting personally on that wilderness wandering. He's looking back over the years of God's people in a wasteland. And there are his own personal thoughts and personal reflections on this time. And the background, of course, concerns Kadesh Barnea, and when the spies brought back what was that evil report They were negative rather than positive, saw obstacles rather than opportunities, saw themselves just as victims rather than victors, and how it discouraged, disheartened the people. And through lack of faith and lack of resolve to go on with God, they were consigned to this wandering wasteland of a life. And it would be littered with graves, and when you read this psalm, it is like making your way through a graveyard. It's not that Moses is preoccupied with death, but he's facing and confronting the awful reality of death. But the great emphasis is life in the light of this death that confronts us all, which he says in the psalm is not something natural, it's judicial. Death has come into our experience through sin. And God's anger lies behind it all, and yet he'll come at the end to a God of mercy and a God of wonder, a God of glory. We'll be looking at that more this evening. But in the early part of this psalm, he is looking back over so much waste and so much disappointment, an experience so tragic. And believers' lives can be like that, where they've been brought out, as the Israelites were brought out of Egypt, but they are not in the promised land. They are not enjoying all that they are called to and entitled to by God's grace and God's mercy. And so he's reflecting on all of this. And now the emphasis, I say, is about life in the light of this death that confronts us all and the shortness of our lives. And then how are we to view our lives? And we come to that at the very end of the psalm. We'll look at that this evening. And this is important because how you view your life will determine to a great extent what you make of your life. How do you view your life? How do you see your life? And we see here Moses has a number of things to say. And to begin with, when you take the whole psalm into account, we have to say that life is a journey. Life is a journey. Because that's the background here. The Israelites were on a journey with God. God had brought them out of a land of bondage, and God had so much to show them, share with them. They were going on a journey with God. Like with Abraham, you remember, where the Lord of glory, Stephen says, appeared to our father Abraham in the Ur of the Chaldees, a land of idolatry. The Lord of glory appeared to him. And Abraham left the land of his birth, the area he was so at home in and comfortable with, and set out into the unknown with God. And God was leading him, and there were lessons to be learned. And as with Abraham, so with the Israelites, so with ourselves, we are on this incredible journey where God has stepped into our lives, God has set us apart, God has called us to heaven and glory. And that term comes up again and again in the New Testament. You see your calling, brethren. Many who were called, and the actual Greek term for church isn't church. It's ecclesia. It's two Greek words. To be called or summoned, and out, ek, to be called out of. And that's how believers saw themselves. They were called out of darkness into light, out of death into life, out of the world and into the kingdom of God. And we've been called, and the believer, as with Abraham, as with the Israelites, have been favoured by God, visited by God, and God has so many things to show us and make known to us and ways in which he would bless us. But we cannot go on this journey, sit out with God and stay where we are. That's impossible. You cannot be prepared to move on and stay where you are. And you remember those words that came to the Israelites at one point. You have dwelt long enough on this plateau. You've been here long enough. It is time to move on. And in terms of this journey, there are challenges to face, and there will be obstacles that have to be overcome. There will be battles that will need to be fought, and there will be promises that need to be claimed, blessings that need to be known. It's an incredible journey that we've been called to, and we are to know by God. And there's something about a journey, isn't there? it captures the imagination. It stirs something deep within us, that sense of adventure and stepping out into the unknown, whether it's Christian in Pilgrim's Progress and all that he will encounter on his way to the celestial city. And there'll be the Slough of Despond, there will be Vanity Fair, there'll be the Castle of Giant Despair, and there'll be Byway Meadow, and there'll be so much he will encounter, battles with Apollyon and so on. But at the last he will come in sight of the celestial city, and it'll be the journey's end. And that is how believers are depicted in the Bible. We are pilgrims, sojourners, travellers through time to glory and eternity. We sang of that, didn't we, with Isaac Watts. We are marching through Emmanuel's land, or Emmanuel's ground, to fairer worlds on high. And Emmanuel means God with us. We're in a region, we're in a land where God is with us. And we're to know him and be open to him, share all with him, prove him, trust in him, explore all that he can be in and through our lives. We are walking through Emmanuel's ground to fairer worlds on high. God is with us here. We will be with him there. So we're on this incredible journey and sense of adventure, whether with Christian in Pilgrim's Progress, whether with Bilbo Baggins in leaving the Shires, in the Lord of the Rings, for all the adventures that will lay before him and all the heroic deeds that will be before him. We read in Hebrews, don't we? This great record of the exploits of faith and all that God's people have accomplished. Is there anything more stirring, thrilling, exhilarating than that chapter in Hebrews? By faith, and then by faith, and again by faith. And that is the journey. I'm reading a book at the moment, and it's a treasure. I came across this book about 50 years ago by a man called William Romaine. And he ministered in London for about 40, 50 years, time of Whitfield Wesley, but he stuck it out in London against all the opposition, the persecution, and he had a sweet, gracious, blessed ministry. Didn't want to know about controversy. Let all them argue about it. Wesley, Whitfield, I'm going to enjoy it. And that was his approach. And when I read his biography a couple of years ago, it so warmed my heart, it thrilled my soul. And here was a man just taken up with God. Well, my copy of this book I read 50 years ago by William Romaine, The Life, the Walk, the Triumph of Faith. It's all about this incredible journey. And when I was in the second-hand bookshop, above the Christian bookshop in Llandudno, I came across a pristine copy, hardback, dust cover for £1. I thought, oh, well, I'm going to go into this and enjoy this again. And I'm thoroughly enjoying. But that idea of we've been brought into the life of faith, we are expected then to walk the walk of faith, but we're ultimately to know the great triumph and victory of faith, where we are trusting in God. Now, we know that with Abraham, the journey he was on, where ultimately he'll come to Mount Moriah. And to what extent can this man trust God? Can he leave his dearest in the hands of God? Can he do that? To what length will this man go? Everything left to the hands and the purpose of God. And so it is a journey that we are on, an incredible journey. And yes, it's the unknown involves much of the unknown. And I called on Leah, our daughter, this week, Gwyneth and I, and little Asher, the other kids are in school. And I said to Leah, I'm going to take you somewhere you've never been before. I love this, Dad, from a child, when you take us, we've never been before. But it's like that. God is taking us. Remember those words? You have not been this way before. Those words. And God leads, he guides. And we little know what challenges and trials and yet blessings there are in this incredible journey with God. And of course there is this sense of the unknown and what is uncertain. But, the wonderful thing is this. Moses states at the very beginning here that God is our dwelling place through every generation. It is in God we live and God we reside, and we shelter in him. And he is saying that this is the shelter of the believer. In all the changes we might encounter in life, we are encountering them all, sheltering in a God eternal, he says, immutable, a God that doesn't alter in his purpose, his love, his good intention toward us. He's a God that is immutable. And there are times we read, don't we, all things work together for good. Doesn't seem like that sometimes. Doesn't look like that sometimes. I was saying to Gwyneth the other day, do you know when I look back at my childhood, I was always having a poultice for some reason or other. And the kids said, Dad, what on earth's a poultice? Well, you wouldn't want it, I can tell you now. It's, you remember the old linen cloth would come out, and then this cream, and then it'd be boiled, and then my mother would say, come on, it might be steaming, this will do you good. No, the other brothers never had it, but I don't know, you got a carbuncle and sugar, you need a poultice. And this will do you good. Now, I didn't think at the time it was going to do me good. And life can be like that. But we are on this journey with God, and there's that lovely sweet hymn, isn't there? In heavenly love abiding, dwelling. No change my heart shall fear. Safe is such confiding. Why, nothing changes here. The storm may roar without me. My heart may low be laid. But God is round about me. And can I be dismayed? And there was a woman I read of being interviewed and asked about her husband having his cave room, his man cave, isn't it? Got a shed on the garden, whatever. It's the man cave. And what have you got? Well, I said, well, if I did have one, she said, I know what name I'd put above it: the panic room. And you see on TVs these panic rooms, don't you? When these wealthy houses and everything, and if there's a break-in or danger, you go into the panic room, locks, and you are safe, untouchable. And that's really what Moses is saying here. God is our panic room. He is where we shelter in danger, in all the changes on this journey, all we encounter on this journey. But isn't it wonderful to be on this journey? Now, see, the problem with the Israelites was this. They were looking backward instead of forward. All the time their hearts were on what had been rather than what could be. And rather than being forward and on a journey that was upward and heavenward and Godward, they kept looking backward. And this prevented them from going forward. And so they were so negative in their outlook rather than positive. And they were complaining and murmuring all the time. It wearied Moses to the point where Moses lost his temper in the end. They were complaining so much. And just murmuring instead of just praising and trusting and proving and thanking God. And that really is our journey with God, in and through all the vicissitudes of life. Of being able to entrust him, and then emerging with promises claimed and proven, and praising and glorifying him. And there will be a journey in this psalm, because as he makes his way through the psalm and the frailty of man and mortality of man, he comes ultimately to what does endure at the end, and it is the mercy of God, the gladness of God, it is the cause of God, it's the beauty of God. These are the things that endure. These are the things that really matter. What we can know in God and with God. That's what ultimately matters. That's all that endures. So life is a journey. And you think of the words of that hymn, isn't it? The sands of time are sinking. And dawn of heaven breaks. Summer morn I've longed for. That fair sweet. So it breaks, but the lines in that hymn, aren't there? It were a well spent journey. Though 7 deaths lay between. Though 7 deaths lay between. The times I have died on this journey. But still it were a well-spent journey. I think it was Winston Churchill wrote that regarding his life. It was a journey worth making once. That's how he saw his life. He didn't want to live it again. And all the heartache, depression, darkness and failure and, well, everything else. Journey worth making once. But in that hymn, it were a well-spent journey. Though 7 deaths lay between. For some, that is literally the case. We've lost dear ones, loved ones. And we've seen them dead and buried. And as here, there is a graveyard looking back. But in another sense, as I look back, I see a time when my name, my reputation seemed dead and buried. A time when my dreams and future and hopes seemed dead and buried. Time when usefulness and service seemed dead and buried. 7 deaths lay between. But what did Paul say about experiences like that? He says we despaired even of life. Wouldn't have you ignorant brethren of the pressures we were under, beyond our ability to endure. We despaired even of life. And then what does Paul to say about those experiences? All of these things happened to us, that we might not trust in ourselves, but in God, who raises the dead. He's a God of resurrection. And when you read Christian biographies and lives, how often you would see times when they seem totally written off. But God raises them up again. And God has wonderful things in store for them again. Ways in which to use them, ways in which to bless them. And we are on this incredible journey. And I look back on my life. You know, we read it's like a tale that is told. We all have a tale. We all have a testimony, don't we? Our life is a journey. But not just a journey, life is short. Because we read here that we read of a shadow, a shuttle, there's a watch in the night, only about 3 hours. We read of grass and a hymn based on this. We blossom and flourish as leaves on the tree. We wither and perish, but naught changeth thee. Our life is so short in relation to eternity. How short is our life here? In relation to all that is gone, how short is the time that we have left and remains. And life is so short. It's so uncertain. And if that is the case, if life is so short, how ought that to impact upon us? Not with a sense of dread or fear, but rather to value life and treasure life. There was a Puritan by the name of Richard Baxter. And you know, it annoys me when I see these programs and the Puritans are caricatured as sort of killjoys and what have you. You would not have a race of men so ingenious, so creative, so spontaneous, so full of energy, out and out with the gospel as the Puritan era. And Richard Baxter was a case in point, only a curate. And vicars then were drunk most of the time, and they would just employ a curate for a pittance, and he would do all the work. And Baxter was in Kidderminster. I first came across him when I read a book on the ministry, and I was about 19 years of age, called to the ministry, went into the Christian bookshop. There wasn't a thing you could get in any bookshop about the ministry. And there was one by a man called Bridges, called the Christian Ministry, and I opened it. He began with all the difficulties attending the ministry. And I thought, wow, this is great. And he went through it. But he kept quoting this man, Richard Baxter. And his quotes were stirring. They were sort of blood-curdling, these quotes. And I thought, I've got to get something by this man. And then years later, I came across a battered old copy that belonged to a minister in Bryn Mawr by the name of Owen Thomas, who was the father-in-law of John Dart, who was a lecturer in Barry College. And I read that and devoured that and put the pages back in. And now I've got his full works, which are about that size, about that thick, which I found 2 of the volumes on a floor in a second-hand shop in Carmarthen. And I went back in and I said, they've gone. Oh, no. He said, a woman came from the farm and they were propping up one of the beds on the farm. So the 4 big volumes. And when you read his works, he was out and out with the gospel. But the point I'm making is this. From very early on, he was vomiting blood when he'd be preaching. Time when TB was rampant. And he was convinced he was dying. And so he had a saying every time he went up into the pulpit, I preach as a dying man to dying men, as never to preach again. And that's how he went into the pulpit. That it was his last sermon, his last message. And that's how he lived. And even to a point when he really thought he was dying, and he only had his concordance and Bible with him, he's away from home, and he started putting all his thoughts down, and they became a classic. So many converted through this book, called The Saints' Everlasting Rest. But he was out and out, wanting to improve on the time that he had. And what do we read here? Teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. See, we tend to live a year at a time, don't we? We go into the new year with great celebrations and resolutions. We tend to live a year at a time. We have our annual birthdays, been announced this morning. We have annual birthdays. But what is biblical is a day at a time. We're to live a day at a time. And when we get to the end of the day, God draws a curtain across it. A dark curtain comes across the day. And then it's lit up for a new day. And every day is fresh from heaven, given fresh by God. And we are meant to live each day and improve on each day. It was at Ida's funeral up in Nelson, and Psalm 139 was read, her favourite psalm. But those words in that psalm, in your book they were all written, before there was even one of them. The days that you, in the Living Bible, scheduled for me. Other versions have assigned for me or appointed for me. Isn't that a lovely thought? That we are walking a heaven-directed course. And each day might be a day of challenge, day of trial, day of blessing, day of service, day of testimony. Each day is given to us of God. And it's like with finances. If your finances are limited, then you have to budget. When we went to Emmanuel in Cardiff in our first deacons meeting, I said to them, look, can you pay my wage by the week? On a Sunday night, like a visiting preacher, give me my wage. Forget being paid by the month. The wages are so low, it will help me budget. As a family, it will help us manage better. And the smaller your finances, the more careful you have to be, and the more need there is to budget. Now, that's true of our days. They're numbered. There are only so many. And they're to be valued and treasured, utilized for God and his service. And you see something of that with Paul. We challenged by it last Sunday morning with Phil, weren't we? In Philippi. Paul arrives. And Paul's first question is not, can you point me to the best hotel? No, it's, what is the jail like in this city? And that's where he was likely to spend the night. But why was that? They're down by a riverside, sharing the gospel. And then in the night they'll be in prison. And him and Silas will be singing praises to God. And I love that. And the prisoners listen to them. Listen to them. I wonder if the jailer did. How much was that a part of what must I do to be saved? That he cried out. There was singing there, and praise there. Paul was using every opportunity to testify of the Lord. And our days, they are so precious, so wonderful. Every day is special. This is the day the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be, what do you say? Glad in it. I'll be glad in it. And in closing, John Wesley. Amazing that he could write this in his 80s. My remnant of days I spend to his praise, who died the whole world to redeem. And be they many or few, my days are his due. And they are all devoted to him. All devoted to him. Isn't that wonderful? That God gives you days, fresh, new. It's over the castle early this morning. What a glorious morning. And a day in which to prove God, know God, serve God. How glorious. Oh Lord our God, our Heavenly Father, we just praise you that you have put your hand upon our lives, that our eyes have been opened, our hearts have been touched. We have, Lord, known what it is to receive that life that is abundant in Jesus. We praise you for all the potential in our lives. Perhaps, O Lord, as yet we've not risen to. Oh, Father, might it be true of us. I'm pressing on the upward way. New heights I'm gaining every day. Still singing as I'm upward bound, Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, forgive us. So often we can live in the valleys of complaint and murmuring, despair and doubt. Lord, by your Holy Spirit, might we be able this day to rise to higher regions, a more heavenly atmosphere, and that heavenly realm in which to worship you and glorify your name. Lord, hear us now for Jesus' sake. Amen.